Everyone, my name is Daniel Hereda. I am a volunteer for NYC Mesh. Other details about me, most of everyone, at least who've been into Mesh, know that I've been doing this since 2020. I did a DIY install in my house in Ridgewood in July of 2020 and did my first volunteer stuff October of that year at a meetup in Fort Greene. So part of this presentation, just for a little background, when Brian was like, oh, we need some people to volunteer to present. I've been having a lot of thoughts in the back of my head about outreach and about how we can become more of like a typical organization where, we are out in the community, tabling, doing various activities. As a side note, I do community outreach for the city. That is my day job. So a lot of what that entails is, working with other organizations to go to community events, share printed resources, and engage with people who are not so involved in, social media, or who are not reading the news, who otherwise would be kept out of the loop of things that are happening, whether that's services, resources, or important information in the community. And my whole job is how can we optimize our not only just our elected officials, but also our agencies in actually getting the word out to community. So part of it is that I want to bring some of this knowledge that I have through my own experience in my other roles to the Mesh to solve a couple problems. So when I was working on this today, the presentation, I was thinking of a witty title. Some of you may know what this is if you are at all involved in politics or know how the city budgeting system works and all the controversy around program to eliminate the gap. So I was like, okay, well, why don't we create our own program to eliminate the gaps in our map? There's a lot of areas in the Mesh that we could expand to, and this is sort of some thinking that I have to spread the word. So just as a couple things I'm going to go through, I've decided to make this a little bit more interactive because I want to, sort of bounce some of the ideas that I have about what's going on. Marco is looking inside. Hey, Marco. And to... Okay. Yeah, we'll do the speaking part in a little bit later, so I'll just go over the stuff, the agenda. So basically, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the recent activities and that has transpired, some of the more bigger expansion projects that I've been a part of, that I've seen happen, that other people have taken the lead on. And then I'd like to sort of hear about how everyone kind of heard about the Mesh and to see how that can translate into outreach strategies for the future, and to hopefully, get some more Mesh out in the neighborhoods. So just as a quick overview of some of my favorite projects that we've done in the past couple of years, some of the neighborhoods that I've been part of or have had other Mesh volunteers, consult about expansion is in a few neighborhoods, namely Brownsville, Harlem, South and East Williamsburg, and Sunset Park. So these are all photos of antennas in multiple neighborhoods. They look pretty similar, but that's Ian installing the Lightbeam LR which is a type of antenna on top of a school in Brownsville. So that was a big one, it was our southeasternmost hub at the time, and I believe still is. So that is a part of neighborhood. If you're familiar with Central Brooklyn, Brownsville is very different landscape than some of the other parts we're densely in, such as Bed-Stuy or Lower East Side Manhattan. It's a very unique character that we were able to get access to that neighborhood. So that was a big expansion. Harlem, a lot of demand for new internet activities, but not a lot of options. And it is a lot of it took a lot of time and organizing and a lot of development from a lot of core members of the team, many of whom are here tonight. So ask some of your Harlem friends on the other side of the room if you want to learn about that. And as well as South and East Williamsburg, which is a kind of a different example where someone who was just sort of interested in tech Dan Miller, who's not here this evening, but basically was just like, I have a tall roof, I'm building a hub, and that's it. And that's another way to get it done, right? And that unlocks an entire dead zone that was previously in the mesh to be able to get connected now. And lastly, Sunset Park, which was another major undertaking. Brian, Quincy, others, Leiden Engineering, engineering to be on top of affordable housing project in Sunset Park, also unlocking a large swath of area in New York City that we can now provide service to. But what does that look like in practice? So each of these is a map of the node map of those hubs as they appear on the mesh, right? So obviously they're light, right? There's maybe one or two people who have been following the mesh for a long time who said, oh, finally mesh is in my neighborhood. And that's what those red dots are. People who have been already familiar with the mesh, who maybe have participated in install, like especially in Harlem, where a lot of our volunteers had lived there for years and participated in the mesh for years and now are finally getting connected. Well, of course they're going to be the first ones on because they're in the mesh. A couple, newer installs, like for instance in here, we have, there's some people who are already in the neighborhood, but who know about the mesh, but also some optimization. For instance, in South Williamsburg, we have a couple hubs already that's in the Bushwick neighborhood that people have been connecting to, and Saratoga is an example, located on Halsey Street and Broadway. If you're real familiar with the J line, a lot of people were connecting from very far to get to that hub. And that was pretty much, for a long time, the only way, if you lived anywhere in Bed-Stuy, Bushwick, Ridgewood, South Williamsburg, that was it. So this is actually adding density and adding capability to already an area we already had coverage. Sunset Park was brand new. There was really not a lot of coverage except for the super node, but once you start getting down towards Dyker Heights and Bay Ridge, the signal's not very good. Because if the further you are, the harder it is to get fast speeds that we usually want for all of our installations. And then of course Brownsville, which has existed for a long time. It was one of my first major projects that I led on my own with the help of other key volunteers. And still to this day, there's not a lot of coverage, mainly due to not being so much engaged with the community. So Brownsville, just as a little bit of an example, it's mostly, it's a mixed, the land use is mixed, so you have either NYCHA projects, affordable housing developments, or you have 1 to 2 family homes. Meaning that per install, you're not really increasing a lot of access, and those people don't have a real strong reason to actually get connected to the mesh or even to hear about the mesh. So just as a little fun activity, I don't know if this is really going to work, but I would like to do a little survey. If everyone, anyone who's interested in participating wants to try to scan this QR code, it's just how to hear about the mesh. And just take a second to do that, and we'll give it about, I'll give you 2 minutes.
So not to go after the fundamental point of your survey here, but you're having a bunch of people that already found out about the mesh and were interested enough to show up to a physical meeting, taking a survey about how to get more people engaged in mesh with the goal of increasing access in areas that haven't shown much interest yet. So it just feels like there's a disconnect between the information we're going to get back from this survey and the information that would be most valuable to get the highest value, most disconnected clients involved.
So that's actually, so there's more to this presentation. There's going to be
okay.
second session, there's going to be second
it.
part. This is actually to address the bias.
Okay.
We're going to learn first about ourselves before
Okay.
we figure out the suggestions.
Got it.
So I'm assuming that means everyone's done. Okay, let's do this. So yeah, so awesome. That actually worked better than I thought it would. So yeah, let's just zoom in here. And yeah, let's learn about a little bit about the people who are in the room, if I can figure out how Zoom works. Yeah, there we go. So, okay, so there we go. So we got 20 responses. It looks like we're tied to the newspaper, so I'm assuming that would mean New York Times or another press publication. That's cool. I'm sure Welcome to the Mesh Brother is very interesting to some. YouTube, so Motherboard or Freethink or another one of some videos that we've done learning about the mesh. That's awesome to see as well. Search engine, actually that's how I found about the mesh. When my long story to when I joined was a bus had actually ripped the Spectrum cable from the side of my house. And I was in the middle of summer classes in 2020. And I'm like, okay, I'm screwed. And then so I'm looking out 5G, wireless, because I didn't have Fios in the neighborhood at the time. Well, actually, they told me I could get Fios, but it was extremely expensive. So I was like, nah. And I somehow came across the mesh. Neighbor, so people who maybe if you live in the same building and you realize, hey, there's mesh on my roof, or someone's telling me about mesh or something like that. I'm assuming what that means. What's the other here? Oh, that's the other. Oh, so so I actually got it backwards because the colors are weird. Other is the 25%. YouTube is 1. Okay, and social media is 1. Okay, probably Twitter or Mastodon. Somehow I feel like it's not Mastodon, but no offense to Brian. So yes, so this is how we generally have heard. Who said other? And I would like to hear your thoughts. Can we give him the mic?
So I daily read like a news generator, and on that news generator, got daily tech from I don't know, all sorts of things. And one of the links was about New York Mesh, which got my attention. And I'm not sure which, it was leading to some kind of blog post. I'm not sure which website it was, I don't remember. But then I was amazed. And then after that, when I learned about this, jump on the search engine, found YouTube, found New York Times, found you, found Slack, and a week from that, I was on my roof trying to, what's going on, and that was it.
Awesome, awesome. Anyone else would like to chime in? I'll just do one more, just for interest of time. Anyone who else put other would like to share? Oh, jolly. Awesome.
There is a response on YouTube,
Okay.
which I'll have to Alt-Tab to get to, which it says, Leiden Thorpe says, saw the public Wi-Fi from a nearby node.
Awesome, awesome. You know, a funny anecdote, there's a couple people over the years who have said, oh man, this community Wi-Fi is so terrible. It's going to dissuade people from connecting, which, okay, maybe, but hopefully that means, let me at least search because maybe it could be good. So awesome, I like that answer.
You mean it's terrible because the signal's so weak?
Yeah. He just said because it's terrible because the signal's so weak. Yeah, because oftentimes, it's just for context for anyone who's not aware, when we do an install in a typical building, we put an antenna on your roof, which gives out a community Wi-Fi signal, but if you're like on the ground and that's 4 stories up, it's not going to be great. But yes, that's a great way to find out about it. Okay, so now that we know a little bit about ourselves, we got some word of mouth, we got some newspaper, so to your point, right, this is, at least in the people of this room, seems like they're well-read, good. It seems like they can use the computer, good. And they talk with their neighbors. Okay, now let's talk about some of the populations in New York, right? So just a little bit more background on myself. A lot of the people who we engage with or who we want to engage with don't have a computer or use their phone or are isolated. They can't speak to their neighbors or community for whatever reason. Don't speak English. Right. So these are all reasons for why this may not work. And these people may not be well represented on our little pie chart here. So let's go ahead and flip to some of my ideas for what's been bouncing around in my head. So here's, am I crazy? Okay, there we go. So some of the stuff that we do in community organizing, citywide, if you're a nonprofit or you're, more of a grassroots group who's trying to get the word out about something. Usually it's about making sure to meet people where they are. And what does that mean? Where are people usually? So part of the things that I have done in both my work, and that's something I want to do in the Mesh, is how can we meet them where they are in terms of the real world? So part of my ideas in terms of creating a proposal for a framework for outreach in the Mesh is to start off by figuring out where people are and how we can engage with people who would otherwise have never heard about the Mesh ever. So an idea for that would be to do more host meetups at public parks, right? So when I did my DIY back in July of 2020, it was something that I found online, but I actually had not ever engaged with the Slack for several months. I didn't even know there was a Slack. I had just emailed back and forth between support@nycmesh.net. Later on, found it was Olivier, who is this guy who's now in Europe, but was advising me how to do the antenna, what the passwords were, get the signals, and then later on, found out through Meetup, which is like the Meetup software we have, that they were doing a training session. How to crimp Ethernet cable at Fort Greene Park. And it's funny because I already kind of knew how to crimp cable. I used to do security cameras installations in high school. So I was just like, I'd come check it out. Maybe they can teach me something. And that went all the way in terms of getting me engaged. Because once I was there are people saying, hey, I'm doing a support visit later. You want to come with me after this is over? Like, yeah, sure. I mean, I'll come. And then I was on the rooftop the first day I had met any other person on the Mesh, which was an experience that is hard to attain if you're just reading a New York Times article or a YouTube video, because you see it, it looks great, but is there a pathway to get on? It just says, oh, check out their website, which can be a little intimidating, right? Or the Slack, which could be a little intimidating. You don't know what's going on. You don't know where people are, what they're doing. To be able to say, we're at the park, this is exactly what it is, here's the equipment, is a way to directly meet people where they are. To get to the park, how do we organize within ourselves? So another phase of this project for me is how can we also get ourselves, as whether you're a volunteer or you're a new member, to help with the outreach process. So in order to do so, I think an effective way to make it easier for us, the people in this room or the people who are on Slack, to actually give them the tools that we need. We now have a banner, we now have a tablecloth, we have printed materials now. This is all stuff that happened in the last couple months. Now we actually have a toolkit where we can say, hey, here's a tote bag full of all the stuff you'll need to share. Here's like a script or some talking points if people come, and then you could anyone in this room could pick up that tote bag, go to the park, and tell people about the Mesh. Because that's the way you can decentralize outreach. Let's say near me, right, I have Maria Hernandez Park by me because I'm in Ridgewood and Bushwick. I could just pick up the tote bag, go to the park, and I'm telling people about the mesh. It's that simple. It's hard to do that if we don't have those materials. But now that we're slowly putting everything together, am I dying here?
This one needs new mic.
Okay. So now that we have those materials, it's going to be easier for people to participate in the outreach process. In a similar way, install leaders do or installers do. Outreach is just, we want to make outreach just as important as that. And the last phase is actually just to try it out in places where we've done this before. As I mentioned, I became like a volunteer in the October meetup in Fort Greene Park because it's a really nice place. There's already tables. All you got to do is show up, bring a few tools, and boom, you're teaching random people on the street how to crimp Ethernet cable. So it works at Fort Greene. We've done the same thing at Prospect Park. I remember Rob and Olivier was there. We were kind of by like, what was that, 15th Street, like 13th Street and Prospect Park West. Just showed up, had some stuff, people walking down this road. Hey, what's going on? What are all these wires? What you building? You know? And then now you're explaining visually, physically, what the mesh is all about, which is not something you'd get from a YouTube video. So these are some of the ways that I would think that we can get this to work. I want to hear, again, there's a bias in this room, but I also want to hear how you think other ideas for how we can get the word out. So you're going to scan a QR code. I would like you 6, your group 1. You also 6, group 2. And okay, I'm going to split it up into 3. Brian and these folks, group 3, and you, group 4. All right. Pick one person in your group to submit the form. And let's talk about it. 5 minutes. One more minute. One more minute. If we could submit, guys. One more minute. One more minute. Group one, I need to submit. Group one. All right, friends. All right, friends. I know if you're still hitting submit, I get it. There's obviously, this is open-ended for a reason. Obviously, there's no right answer to outreach. That is one of the hard things I learned since I started my current job. And that there's many ideas, and it depends on your own backgrounds. As you know, first thing we did was figure out what our biases were. You know, I know that Mesh has a lot of bias, tech bro bias, as it were, because. But first, before we look at the responses and talk about what each group wrote, I'll highlight that something interesting happened. Just an observation I made. Look around you, right? The groups. I think we have a more. I mean, obviously, there's new members mixed in. But we have a strong new / just learning about the mesh population on this side of the room compared to this side of the room. Again, exceptions here and there, but I think it would be interesting to see how groups 1 and 2's answers compare with groups 3 and 4. Just want to highlight that. So let's take a look. So let's see if this works. So I think, okay, you're going to be annoying. I bet, yeah, my Google Photos crazy. Someone submitted individual, doesn't matter. Okay. All right, so I guess we'll start with group 3. Okay, let's read it. So I'm gonna, no problem. So let's read the idea from group 3. Through group 3, raise your hand. Okay, so let's just do a little play on that distribution. So what's your name? Cesaria? John? That was it? And we had Cody. So Cesaria, John, Cody, Andrew was part of. So 3 out of 4, you know, just because I know, in the mesh, 1 new member. So let's read it out loud. Coffee shop, bulletin board, or community center, postcards via bulk junk mail, scratch and sniff to smell the mesh. That's good. Yeah, sometimes when you open these antennas, they have a kind of, you know, industrial. Coordinate with community orgs and their email list or whatever. Stickers around the neighborhood, fake mesh Wi-Fi at the table to get people to do a speed test or do a test video call. Awesome. Well, fake in that it may not, I'm assuming what that means, and correct me because I'm about to hand you a mic, probably means like, is the mesh, but it's really just off of someone's hotspot, but it gives you an idea of what it was. So would you like to nominate a rep to talk about some of your ideas and what you're thinking? Okay, Jody, this is the cue for the, sorry.
Am I allowed to talk now?
No,
Okay.
no, do not speak. Silence. No worries. All right.
Okay.
Action.
All right. Yeah, so we were just talking about, I mean, yeah, Daniel covered the summary pretty well, but like meeting people where they're at with the coffee shop bulletin boards, like other community center bulletin boards, places where like you can get free advertising, you know, like don't know what the conversion is on that stuff, but if it's free, right? So we may as well. And then, yeah, Brian has been, I've heard him talk about this before, but like with postcards, you can like target the small zip code, the small part of the zip code, which sounds like it's like a block or two in some cases. So we could possibly target areas where like we know for sure we're very likely to be able to serve them. So we will make some pretty strong claims potentially that way. And then of course, there are community organizations like, I mean, Grand Street Guild is one example here, where we have a partnership and we are able to leverage some of their like brand and trust with the community in order to sort of have an in and you know, sort of get the time of day with people. Yeah, the scratch and sniff is kind of a joke.
Oh, shucks.
You know, stickers maybe, though the vibe there is like a little bit more renegade than maybe we're going for. And then also, yeah, like when we're tabling, having some kind of interactive element where there is like, you know, the community Wi-Fi SSID, but that comes from, you know, from a hotspot or something. Or, I mean, depending on the park, you know, maybe we've got something nearby. Would be cool if that was the case, right? Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Good job, Group 3. Okay, I'm not going to do discussion yet because I don't want to stand up here for longer than I have to, but we can continue the discussion after presentation. So let's look at the next response.
Back to switch to the side.
Okay. Okay. Let me know when you're ready. Did anyone read my lips? I could get the camera. I could pop.
No, he's going to switch from slide to camera.
Oh, okay, cool. Okay, so I'm going to read what Group 4. Raise your hand, Group 4. This guy's, okay. So let's see what Group 4 was thinking. We were thinking about different kinds of engagement. Deepening existing members' engagement, flyering in a neighborhood where there's existing service, extra blog posts, neighborhood events that transition gracefully into participation, and building connections with professional partners who can build the mesh into their professional workflow. The observation here is that there are many ways to engage and to contribute, and that we're picking from great options. That is a good point. So who would like to speak a little bit about their proposal? Hi, are you leaving permanently? Okay. 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 Bye, Andrew. All right. Yes.
All right, we went around the table and ended up having 3 different ideas from 3 different people, and what we kind of determined was that they fit into the 3 kind of fundamental pillars of the mesh, in that we had the outreach to the people who are not members yet, who need the service, and like our I don't know what you call it, their target audience, right? And ways to reach out to them. So that goes to the flyer in the neighborhood and blog post and that kind of stuff to get the word out to that. Then the neighborhoods transitioning gracefully into participation, it's hard to say, is more for activating volunteers in the communities that we're reaching out to. I had a similar experience to Daniel in that I went to a community outreach that was set up because I was like, I want to meet some of the mesh people. And while I was there, hey, they had something to fix, and we ended up on a roof aligning an antenna. And I think that's a really kind of slick way to get people involved, because they've come, they've reached out to getting to learn a little bit about it and then get involved into an actual project. So I was thinking that if we did neighborhood participation, that we could try to align it with when we're doing projects in neighborhoods as one step, or just looking for some kind of not really critical, but little project we could do while we're in a neighborhood, and anybody who hangs around and participates, we're like, hey, you want to come see what we're doing, kind of thing. And then he touched on kind of, I would look at it as like Brian's big push lately on large projects and getting involved with the architects and the fundamental like building plan, planning stage of buildings, and getting involved at that point where we can really like hit a large number of members coming online at once in set areas. So that kind of deals with, you know, the users on the end point, the volunteers who put it all together, and the infrastructure piece that's in the middle of it.
Awesome. Thank you for the response. Jolly's about to sit down, and I'm going to have to grab him again. So now, thank you, Group 4. So let us move on to the next submission, which will be Group 2. Awesome. So let's read the response. I guess Jolly's going to come over, switch the camera. All right, cool. Oh, it's going to look at me first. All right, okay. All right, so let's suggest some ideas. Group 2 says TikToks, which is a low barrier to entry. We can highlight exciting installations, good for low attention span, short interviews, put up APs in parks with flyers. We have the budget and it's directly impactful to the community. Flyers, APs on community fridges, free little libraries, other community centers, outreach, and networking with other nonprofits. Centralized points within existing communities would reduce one potential cost for smaller organizations. All right, let's hear more about your ideas.
Yeah, so I think that the favorite, like among us, was probably either the like TikTok angle. I mean, I think we like all three ideas equally, but it's sort of a social media is like one area where the mesh like isn't super strong. Like, you know, our blog is like a few years out of date, and we've got like the meetup page, we've got the Slack, we've got the website, but you know, you mentioned yourself that like they might be intimidating to some people, right? Especially the people who, you know, would be the target audience. So getting onto these social media networks like TikTok would give us a direct line to maybe like a younger group, people who are just on their phones anyway. They'll see us, they'll see the exciting things that we're doing, and they'll be like, oh, that's cool, let me go to nycmesh.net. And then from there, you know, we can, you know, teach them more and maybe get them involved. And so that's, you know, sort of just another potential ingress point for people. The APs in like public places like parks and also community centers would be a direct way to help people like now. That would be like super helpful, and also would improve, you know, signal strength. You know, maybe if people are like, oh, this Wi-Fi signal from the roof sucks. It's like, well, yeah, it's because it's going through 3 stories of concrete. But if it's, you know, right next to the community fridge, or, you know, out and about in a park and you've got an OmniTick there, all you would need is somebody nearby to hang something out their window, and then maybe you could extend it to the park and have a flyer that's like, hey, this is courtesy of NYC Mesh, it's totally free. If you're interested in learning more, you know, hit us up at this URL. Same thing with the sort of community center approach is like, yo, we are just trying to get more involved with these communities that already exist, right? Because they have established centers. So, you know, if we could bridge that gap, and then, you know, get more involved, and then potentially connect people, you know, that would be really awesome.
Cool, thank you for that. I'll highlight 2 observations I made about what you said, just because it's interesting. First, the TikTok in the room. I think it's interesting how, you know, I've been in my own brain, and this is maybe my own bias, is that normally I feel like we don't target the older population enough. But actually we are leaving a huge part of the population out by not really targeting young people, because there are plenty of young people who are not super tech savvy as well, who are not in these sort of tech spaces, tech circles. So I think that's a good point, and increasing the social media presence is good for that. I'll also say another thing that occurs to me with that is the newer population in the group. Notice what he said. The blog is years out of date. The first entry point into the mesh, finding our website, is a few years out of date. That's something that should be fixed right away. Because for new people who look on our website, who see there's not a lot of activity, they may not think anything's going on, because they haven't actually found the pathway to involvement. So I think that's a really good point that you brought up there. And lastly, we're going to head over, last but not leastly, possibly numerically, is group 1. So let us read it. Number 1, we need marketing materials in other languages, not just Spanish, that are accurately translated and specifically discuss concerns that we will be able to support them on Slack. Target above-ground subway stations with captive portals for mesh since they don't have Wi-Fi. Reach out to neighborhood associations like Brooklyn Heights. Connect with libraries, door-to-door sales for critical locations and targeted advertisements. Expand coverage of mesh portals so more people can see them, have a higher quality experience. Have a less technical IT portal to address concerns so customers can text, email, and not have to have a smartphone or Slack. Call out ISPBS that you don't need 1 gig service, that our support is excellent, and hold meetings in different parks and invite the community, even people who don't want to volunteer. Make sure I'm not leaving that. Okay, so who is going to speak?
So, I mean, I was the one that
Charlie?
wrote these down, but a lot of
One
the
sec.
ideas came.
sec.
Yeah, this camera's not working, so it's just audio.
Oh, okay. All right.
Okay. So while I was the one that was typing most of these, these are just me translating ideas from especially newer members, especially from people that haven't been to a lot of meetings and don't have, they don't, they're just thinking about, okay, what is something we could do and not how are we limited by these things that we already, or how are we limited by our organizational structure? So, okay, door-to-door sales. It probably will be very time-consuming, but if that is what people come to expect from organizations, if that is a way we can communicate one-on-one to people in areas that need high-capacity links to get the most people, the most service, then it might be worth spending that time, effort, money, etc. Specific organizations that specific people have knowledge into. Okay, how do we connect with Brooklyn Heights? How do we get people that have those existing connections so that we don't have to cold call people, don't have to show up and, don't have to seem like we don't have any idea what we're doing. Because, I mean, we're a very well put together organization. We just need to let people know what we are and how we're different so we can fit into their experiences that they're already having.
Cool. Thank you for that. And that's also a good point, that, you know, maybe people, that it's an identity thing and a branding thing, that people look at us and may say, well, is this an internet company? Are you a nonprofit? Like, what are you? And maybe what I'm taking from what you say, or you're saying, is that people don't even know what to think about it, right? People don't know exactly who we are, how do we interface with us? Are you sending me a bill at the end of the month? What's going on, right? So I think to be able to frame it to make sure that people are understanding what the mission is and why we want them to connect, I think is a helpful point. I think that is it in terms of that. So thank you for participating and with such good responses. I think we'll conclude, but to conclude, if I could. Yes. Tell us about social media.
I looked after social media for the Mesh for most of the last 8 years or so, and Twitter was actually really good, and we had like 6,000 followers there. So it was really successful in getting people involved. And Twitter's officially dead as of yesterday. Yeah, so I just post links to Mastodon and Blue Sky and things on Twitter now, and occasional information. And Annabelle's helping me with Instagram now. I haven't been posting enough on Instagram, but yeah. And I've asked for help on social media like every year for 8 years, and yeah, I've never been able to get anyone to post regularly. But yeah, I'm hoping Annabelle will be posting. I love TikTok. I've never figured out how to get the mesh on TikTok because you got to do like really funny videos, and you got to. Yeah. I have my own account and I post videos of a dash hound, and I haven't figured out how to do mesh TikToks. But if anyone wants to help me, yeah, I'd love to do that.
I should spend less time complaining on TikTok that I can't tag NYC Mesh and more time actually setting up an account on TikTok. Yeah. Okay. Because that's what I just did.
Oh, you set up one?
I posted a video that said I have a guy talking about TikTok.
Right.
Tag NYC Mesh on TikTok. This is obviously a problem. So, yeah.
I have no idea how TikTok works.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Brian, for sharing that context, and I think that's going to be helpful for the last slide. I never end something without action items because that's a waste of time, right? Never end a meeting. Here's a tip that's an old mentor. Why'd you do this to me? Oh, I did this to me. Oh, it's not charging through the Thunderbolt thing? Okay, all right. More tech, more problems, right? Let's read, if I can figure out if I have Canva on my phone here. Let's see. Yeah, I can read. Can I read? Hopefully. Since people aren't seeing anything anyway. Okay, yeah, so the end. And tip for Zooms and stuff, never end a Zoom without having action items and follow-up. Pro tip. I've had many mentors tell me that. If you're in a Zoom, any kind, always end with follow-ups and action items. So, something that I want to do after this, and after hopefully conversing with a lot of you and the rest of this meetup, is to hopefully identify some project leaders who can gather data on some of the neighborhoods I mentioned and some other neighbors where you'd like to see the mesh expand, right? We need to step up as leaders in order to get through, right? So like when I first joined the mesh, you know, I was intimidated like everyone else. Like, oh, there's Olivier, who's this and that and the other, and there's Brian, and you don't know what the structure is because it's a loose structure. But that also gives an opportunity for people who are committed to outreach especially to step up and say, hey, this is my neighborhood. I live in Ridgewood. I want to see 20 more nodes in Ridgewood by the end of the year, right? You take ownership of that and you can say, hey, I want to research all of the parks in Ridgewood. And so I'm hoping that maybe today some people will emerge from the crowd, maybe if they're watching online or here in this room with us, to volunteer to be project managers here. The next thing I think we want to do, Jolly, what's going on here? Jolly? I would not worry about that because it's really distracting. Please. Okay. We could do this in-house. Internal outreach to interested volunteers. I think that's a very important thing to do because we need to organize ourselves as a base. You know, we've got the install thing down. We always have install. I mean, sometimes we are short of install leaders, but that's really because people who already know how to do an install aren't ready to do it on their own. So to create people to organize within ourselves means that we actually have to, you know, the people who have been in the mesh for a while need to say, hey, you've shown some interest. Come to the park with me on Saturday. We're going to table. You're going to help me schlep the stuff from Grand Street, and we're going to get some stuff done. We need to organize internally so then we can show up with a greater presence at all of the areas that we want to see Mesh expand. And I'm hoping in terms of a timeline that by this fall, now that we have all the printed materials, we have a tablecloth, we have a banner, now we have no excuses. By this fall, we can already start going to places that we've already done we've already had successful meetups at, like Fort Greene Park, for instance, right? It's not a super mesh dense area, but there's a lot of people who are, in a good age bracket to understand what it is and who would be interested in this. Host some meetups at Fort Greene, host some meetups at Prospect Park. Maybe it's time to host some meetups at Sunset Park. We could do this fall, and so the next year, when it's summer, we can hit the ground running, and we already have the framework to get it done. That's my presentation. Thank you.